On a quiet farm in the American countryside lived a kind farmer named Daniel. Every evening, just as the sun began to sink behind the rolling hills, Daniel finished feeding his cows, chickens, and horses. The warm golden light covered the fields, and a gentle breeze carried the sweet smell of fresh hay. He walked slowly across the farm, making sure every gate was closed and every animal was comfortable for the night. The birds sang their final songs before flying to their nests, while the crickets began their soft evening music. When darkness arrived, Daniel sat on his wooden porch with a warm cup of tea. He watched thousands of stars appear one by one in the clear sky. The farm became wonderfully quiet. The cows rested peacefully in the barn, the horses stood calmly, and the chickens slept on their wooden perches. Daniel smiled, feeling thankful for another peaceful day. Soon he went inside his cozy farmhouse, read a few pages of an old book, and fell asleep to the gentle sound of the wind outside. Before sunrise, Daniel woke to the cheerful crow of a rooster. The morning air was cool and fresh, and a light mist floated over the green fields. As the first rays of sunlight touched the grass, tiny drops of dew sparkled like diamonds. Daniel greeted his animals with a gentle voice, filled their feeders, and milked the cows. The horses happily trotted around their pasture, while the chickens searched the ground for seeds. The peaceful rhythm of the farm slowly came to life. After a simple breakfast of fresh eggs, warm bread, and milk, Daniel walked through his cornfield to check the growing crops. Butterflies fluttered from flower to flower, bees buzzed softly, and colorful birds filled the air with beautiful songs. There was no hurry, no loud noise, and no stress, only the comforting sounds of nature. Daniel believed that every sunrise brought a new opportunity to care for the land that had cared for his family for generations. As the morning grew warmer, Daniel smiled at the beautiful farm around him. The peaceful evening had given way to a bright new day, reminding him that every sunset is followed by another sunrise. Life on the farm was simple, but it was filled with gratitude, kindness, hard work, and the quiet beauty of nature. And as another day gently unfolded, Daniel knew he wouldn't trade his peaceful farm life for anything else. After the calm morning, Daniel spent the rest of the day working gently across the farm. He mended a loose fence, gathered eggs, and carried fresh water to the animals. The sun moved slowly overhead, and the fields shimmered in the light. A neighbor stopped by with a basket of apples, and Daniel shared some fresh milk in return. They talked about the weather, the crops, and the simple joys of country life. By afternoon, soft clouds drifted across the sky. Daniel checked the barn roof and stacked hay for the coming week. The cows chewed quietly in the shade, and the horses flicked their tails to keep away the flies. Even the chickens seemed content, scratching happily in the dirt. Daniel worked with patience, knowing that every small task helped the farm stay healthy and strong. As evening returned, the sky turned orange and pink. Daniel stood in the middle of his field and watched the sun lower behind the trees. The air cooled, and the first stars began to shine. He felt the same deep peace he always felt at the end of a long day. The farm was not grand or noisy, but it was full of life, love, and steady purpose. After feeding the animals one last time, Daniel sat on his porch again with his tea. The crickets sang, the wind moved softly through the corn, and the farmhouse glowed with warm light. He smiled, grateful for the quiet rhythm of his days. On his farm, every morning brought hope, every evening brought rest, and every moment reminded him how beautiful a simple life could be. The next morning arrived with a soft mist hanging over the fields. Daniel woke before sunrise and stepped outside to breathe in the cool, fresh air. The grass was wet with dew, and the farm looked quiet and still, as if it were resting before another busy day. He smiled as he listened to the distant call of birds waking in the trees. After a simple breakfast, Daniel began his work with steady hands. He opened the gates for the sheep, checked the water troughs, and walked slowly through the rows of crops to see how they were growing. The soil was rich and dark after the gentle rain from the night before. Daniel knelt down, touched the earth, and felt thankful for the land that gave him so much in return. Late in the morning, a small problem came to his attention. One of the younger calves had wandered near a broken section of fence. and Daniel quickly repaired it before the animal could slip through. He worked carefully, using his tools with patience and care. When the fence was fixed, the calf returned safely to the others, and Daniel let out a quiet sigh of relief. By the time the sun climbed higher, the mist had faded, and the farm was glowing in the warm light. Daniel stood near the barn and looked across everything he had built with his own hands. The animals were safe, the fields were growing, and the day was unfolding in its own gentle way. He felt proud, not because the work was easy, but because it was honest and full of meaning. As the afternoon moved on, Daniel knew there would always be more to do, but he no longer felt rushed by it. He had learned to move with the rhythm of the farm, to welcome each task as it came, and to find joy in the quiet moments between them. On his peaceful land, life continued one calm day at a time, and Daniel was grateful for every one of them. That evening, Daniel finished his chores just as the sky began to soften into shades of gold and rose. The sun lowered slowly behind the hills, and long shadows stretched across the fields. He paused at the edge of the yard, taking in the quiet beauty of the farm as the day came to a gentle close. The air was cool again, carrying the scent of earth, hay, and the promise of night. Inside the barn, the animals settled into their places, one by one. The sheep curled together in a calm cluster. The calves rested near their mothers, and the hens tucked themselves safely into the straw. Daniel moved among them, with a lantern in his hand, checking each stall and making sure every gate was secure. The soft glow of the light flickered against the wooden walls, and the familiar sounds of the barn filled him with comfort. When his work was done, Daniel stepped outside and looked up at the evening sky. A few stars had already begun to appear, faint and distant, above the darkening fields. He stood still for a moment, letting the silence surround him. There was no hurry now, no need to think of tomorrow just yet. The farm was peaceful, and everything was as it should be. He returned to the house and prepared a simple supper, eating slowly by the window as the last light faded from the land. Beyond the glass, the fields rested beneath the night, and the trees stood quietly against the sky. Daniel felt the weight of the day leave him as he sat there, grateful for the steady life he had built and the calm that came with it. Before going to bed, he opened the door one last time and listened to the stillness outside. The farm was asleep, wrapped in moonlight and gentle shadows. Daniel smiled softly, knowing that morning would come again with its own work, its own beauty, and its own quiet blessings. With that peaceful thought, he closed the door, ready to rest and welcome another day on the land he loved. Before dawn had fully arrived, Daniel stirred awake to the faint sound of the rooster calling from the yard. The room was still dim, and the first light of morning had only just begun to slip through the curtains. He lay quietly for a moment, listening to the soft sounds of the waking farm. Somewhere outside, a breeze moved gently through the trees, and the day seemed to be rising with a calm and patient breath. He dressed quickly and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The fields were covered in a thin layer of mist, and the grass glistened with dew. The sky above was pale and clear, touched with the soft colors of sunrise. Daniel stood at the porch for a moment, taking in the quiet beauty of the land before beginning his work. The farm felt fresh and new, as if it had been washed clean by the night. His first task was to visit the animals. The hens were already awake, pecking eagerly at the ground, while the sheep lifted their heads at his approach. He fed them carefully, speaking to them in a low and gentle voice. The calves nuzzled near the fence, and Daniel smiled as he checked their water and made sure each one was healthy and content. The morning chores were simple, but they gave shape to the day and filled him with a steady sense of purpose. After tending the animals, he walked out to the fields. The sun had begun to rise higher, and its light spread slowly across the land, warming the earth and brightening the rows of crops. Daniel inspected the soil, the fences, and the young plants growing in neat lines. Everything was in order, and the sight of it brought him quiet satisfaction. He knelt for a moment to touch the ground, feeling the life and promise held within it. When the work was finished, Daniel returned to the house and prepared a modest breakfast. He sat by the window with a warm cup in his hands, watching the morning unfold across the farm. The mist had lifted from the fields, and the day now shone with clear, gentle light. Birds moved through the trees, and the whole world seemed awake and at peace. Daniel ate slowly, grateful for the stillness and the simple rhythm of his life. The morning had brought its own kind of blessing, just as the evening before had done. With the day stretching open before him, he felt ready for whatever small tasks lay ahead. On the quiet farm, surrounded by the land he cared for, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. After breakfast, Daniel washed his cup and set it aside near the sink. The house was quiet, except for the soft creak of the floorboards beneath his steps and the distant murmur of the wind outside. He stood for a moment by the window, looking out over the fields as the morning light grew stronger. There was no hurry in the day, no pressing need to rush from one task to the next. The farm would ask for his attention in its own time, and he was content to meet it patiently. There was something deeply satisfying in these ordinary tasks, in the way each one fit naturally into the next. The farm did not demand grand gestures or hurried effort. It asked only for care, attention, and a willingness to keep going. When the sun reached its highest point, Daniel took a short rest beneath the shade of the porch. He sat in his chair with his hat resting beside him, listening to the sounds of the farm around him. A cow lowed softly in the distance. Leaves rustled overhead. Somewhere beyond the fields, a stream moved over stones with a gentle, steady voice. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment and let the warmth of the day settle around him. He thought of the seasons turning, of the work that had already been done and the work still to come. There was always something waiting on a farm, something to mend, to plant, to gather, or to watch over. Yet none of it felt heavy to him. Each task was part of a larger rhythm, one that gave shape to his days and meaning to his quiet life. He had come to trust that rhythm, and in trusting it, he had found peace. By afternoon, Daniel rose and returned to his chores with renewed energy. He checked the fence line near the pasture, tightening a loose board and clearing away a few fallen branches. He filled the water troughs and made sure the animals had plenty of shade. The sheep grazed lazily in the field, and the calves moved close together beneath the trees. Everything seemed calm and well, and Daniel felt grateful for the simple order of it all. As the day began to soften toward evening, he looked across the farm and saw the sunlight turning golden over the fields. The long shadows stretched gently over the ground, and the air grew cooler with each passing hour. Daniel stood still for a moment, taking in the quiet beauty of the land he had tended all day. The work was never truly finished, but for now, it was enough to know that all was well. He turned back toward the house, ready to prepare for the evening ahead. The farm behind him rested in the warm light of late day, peaceful and familiar. Daniel walked slowly, feeling the calm of the land settle deep within him. Another day had passed in steady labor and quiet grace, and once again he was thankful for the life he had built among the fields. Daniel prepared a simple supper as the evening settled over the farm. He carried the meal to the table and ate slowly, listening to the quiet sounds that drifted in through the open window. The day's work had left him pleasantly tired, and there was comfort in the stillness that followed a full day of honest labor. Outside, the sky deepened from gold to soft blue, and the first stars began to appear above the fields. After supper, he washed the dishes and dried them carefully before putting them away. The kitchen grew dim as the last light faded from the room, and Daniel lit a lamp beside the table. Its warm glow spread gently across the walls, making the house feel calm and welcoming. He checked the door once, made sure the windows were latched, and then stepped outside for a final look around the yard. The air had cooled and a light breeze moved through the trees near the house. Daniel stood for a moment on the porch, watching the shadows gather along the fence line and the pasture beyond. The animals had settled for the night, and the farm seemed to rest beneath the quiet sky. There was a deep peace in those evening hours, a sense that all things had found their place until morning came again. He returned indoors and sat for a while in his chair, the lamp beside him casting a soft circle of light. He thought about the work he had done that day and the work that would wait for him tomorrow. There would always be more to tend, more to repair, more to gather in its proper season. Yet none of it troubled him. The days on the farm had taught him that life did not need to be hurried to be meaningful. It only needed to be lived with care. When he was ready, Daniel banked the fire and made his way to bed. The house was quiet now, with only the faint creak of settling wood and the distant call of a night bird breaking the silence. He lay down and let the stillness of the farm surround him. Sleep came easily, carrying with it the gentle assurance that the morning would arrive in its own time. At dawn, Daniel woke to the pale light of a new day slipping through the curtains. He rose quietly and dressed, then stepped outside to greet the cool morning air. The fields were covered in a thin layer of mist, and the grass shone with dew. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster called out, and the sound seemed to awaken the whole farm. He walked first to the barn, where the animals stirred at the sight of him. Daniel fed them with steady hands, speaking to them in a low, familiar voice. The cows shifted in their stalls, the chickens pecked eagerly at their feed, and the sheep lifted their heads as he passed. Each creature seemed to know the rhythm of the morning, and Daniel moved among them with the ease of long habit. After the animals were cared for, he carried a bucket of water to the garden and began his rounds among the plants. The leaves were cool and damp beneath his fingers, and the earth gave off a rich, fresh scent. He noticed a few ripe vegetables ready to be picked, and placed them carefully into his basket. The garden had grown well under his patient attention, and he felt a quiet satisfaction in seeing the results of days and weeks of steady care. As the sun climbed higher, the mist lifted from the fields, and the farm brightened once more beneath the morning light. Daniel stood for a moment at the edge of the garden, looking out across the land he knew so well. The day stretched ahead of him, full of ordinary tasks and familiar duties, and he welcomed it without hesitation. There was peace in the work, peace in the silence, and peace in the simple life he had chosen. With the basket in hand, he turned back toward the house, ready to begin again. The morning was still young, and the light had only just begun to warm the edges of the fields. Daniel carried the vegetables into the kitchen and set them on the table, where their colors looked bright against the worn wood. He paused for a moment beside the window, watching the sunlight spread slowly across the yard, and felt grateful for the quiet beginning of another ordinary day. He prepared a simple breakfast and ate while the house filled with the sounds of morning. The kettle gave a soft hiss on the stove, and somewhere outside a breeze moved through the trees with a gentle rustle. Daniel took his time, as he always did, never hurrying through the moments that made up his days. There was no need to rush when the work would still be there waiting, steady and patient, just as the land itself had always been. After breakfast, he set about the tasks that needed his attention. A gate near the pasture had loosened in the night, and he carried his tools out to mend it before the animals wandered too far. The wood was weathered but sound, and with a few careful adjustments the latch held firm once more. Daniel tested it twice, then stood back and nodded with quiet approval. Small repairs like this were part of the life he knew well, and he took pride in doing them properly. From there he moved on to the shed, where a few supplies needed sorting, and a stack of boards had to be arranged out of the way. He worked with unhurried hands, placing each thing where it belonged. The farm seemed to settle around him as he moved, as if it too appreciated the order he brought to it. By the time he finished, the sun had climbed higher, and the morning mist had long since disappeared from the fields. Near midday, Daniel took a moment to rest beneath the shade of a tree at the edge of the yard. He sat with his hat in his lap and looked out over the land, listening to the distant lowing of the cows and the soft clucking of hens nearby. The air was warm now, but not yet heavy, and the sky stretched wide and clear above him. In that stillness he felt the deep contentment that came from work done with care and a life lived close to the rhythms of the earth. When he rose again, he returned to the garden to check the rows once more. A few plants had grown taller overnight, and the beans had begun to climb their supports with quiet determination. Daniel brushed the soil from his hands and smiled at the sight. There was something reassuring in the way the garden answered patience with growth, as though it understood the value of steady tending better than words ever could. By afternoon, the light had softened, and a few clouds drifted lazily across the sky. Daniel gathered what he needed for the evening meal and carried it inside. The kitchen felt cool and welcoming after the warmth of the fields, and he set to work with the same calm attention he gave to every task. As he prepared the food, he thought not of what had been left undone, but of all that had been accomplished through simple, faithful effort. When the meal was ready, he sat once more at the table and looked out through the open window at the farm beyond. The day had passed in the familiar way he had come to cherish, with labor, rest, and the quiet satisfaction of both. Soon the evening would settle in again, and the stars would return to their places above the fields. Daniel welcomed that thought with a peaceful heart, knowing that tomorrow would bring its own work, its own light, and its own gentle beginning. As the sun drifted lower in the western sky, the golden light stretched across the fields, painting every blade of grass with a warm glow. Daniel stepped outside once again after washing the dishes, taking a slow walk around the farm before evening settled in. The air had cooled just enough to make every breath feel fresh and comforting. A pair of bluebirds fluttered across the fence, while the distant sound of a small creek flowed gently through the quiet countryside. It was his favorite time of day, when the hard work was nearly finished and nature seemed to slow its pace. He walked first to the barn, where the cows were returning one by one from the pasture. They moved calmly, knowing the familiar path without needing to be guided. Daniel greeted each animal with a quiet voice as he filled their feeding troughs with fresh hay. The horses stood patiently nearby, their tails swishing lazily as they waited for their evening meal. The chickens gathered near the coop, clucking softly as they searched for the last seeds scattered across the ground before climbing onto their roosts for the night. When every animal had been cared for, Daniel checked each gate carefully. He closed the wooden latches, making sure they were secure before darkness arrived. The fences stood strong after the morning repairs, and he felt satisfied knowing everything was ready for another peaceful night. A gentle breeze moved through the tall corn, creating soft waves that shimmered beneath the fading sunlight. Daniel paused for a long moment simply to watch, appreciating the quiet beauty that surrounded him every evening. The sky slowly changed from bright blue to shades of orange, pink, and lavender. Thin clouds reflected the colors of the setting sun, while the first evening stars quietly appeared overhead. Daniel sat on the old wooden bench beside the farmhouse porch, with a warm mug of tea resting in his hands. He listened as the crickets began their nightly chorus, and tree frogs answered from the edge of the nearby pond. There were no loud engines, no crowded streets, and no hurry. Only peaceful sounds that welcomed the coming night. As darkness gently covered the farm, lights glowed softly from the farmhouse windows. Daniel went inside, lit a small lamp on the table, and opened the weather journal he had kept for many years. He wrote a few simple lines about the day's harvest, the repaired gate, and the calm weather that had blessed the farm. His words were never long, but they reminded him that even the smallest moments were worth remembering. Before going to bed, he stepped onto the porch one final time. The moon had risen above the trees, bathing the fields in a silver light. Fireflies drifted slowly above the grass, like tiny floating lanterns, while the wind whispered gently through the leaves. Daniel smiled quietly, thankful for another ordinary day filled with honest work, peaceful moments, and the steady rhythm of farm life. With a grateful heart, he closed the door. Long before the sun appeared above the horizon, the farm rested beneath a blanket of cool darkness. The stars still sparkled brightly overhead, and a gentle breeze carried the fresh scent of grass across the fields. Inside the farmhouse, Daniel slept peacefully until the familiar crow of the rooster echoed through the quiet morning. He opened his eyes slowly, stretched his arms, and smiled as another simple day began. There was no loud alarm clock, no rushing footsteps, and no busy traffic. Only the calm rhythm of country life, waking one peaceful moment at a time. Daniel dressed in his well-worn work clothes and stepped onto the porch with a warm cup of coffee in his hands. The eastern sky had begun to glow with soft shades of blue and pale orange. A light mist floated over the fields, making the farm look almost magical. Tiny drops of dew rested on every blade of grass, sparkling as the first rays of sunlight reached the ground. For a few quiet minutes, Daniel simply stood there, listening to the gentle songs of robins, sparrows, and meadowlarks welcoming the new day. Soon it was time to begin the morning chores. The cows waited calmly in the barn, knowing breakfast would arrive as it always did. Daniel filled their feeders with fresh hay and clean water before milking them with slow, careful movements. Nearby, the horses greeted him with soft nickers, eager to begin another peaceful day in the pasture. He brushed their coats until they shone in the growing sunlight, then opened the gate and watched them trot happily across the green field. Their quiet energy filled the farm with a sense of life and hope. Next, Daniel visited the chicken coop. As soon as he opened the door, the hens wandered outside, scratching gently through the soil in search of seeds and insects. He collected several warm eggs from the nesting boxes and placed them carefully into a woven basket. A curious little chick followed behind his boots for a short distance before hurrying back to its mother. Daniel laughed softly, enjoying the small surprises that nature often offered without warning. After finishing his chores, he walked toward the vegetable garden once again. The tomato plants had grown a little taller, and the rows of beans reached confidently toward the morning sun. Bees buzzed from flower to flower, while colorful butterflies drifted slowly through the air. Daniel watered the plants carefully, making sure each row received exactly what it needed. He believed that patience and steady care were the greatest tools any farmer could have, and the thriving garden reminded him of that truth every single day. By mid-morning, the farm was fully awake. The breeze carried the scent of fresh earth, birds filled the sky with cheerful songs, and the fields stretched endlessly beneath the bright blue heavens. Daniel paused beside an old oak tree, looking across the land that had become more than a workplace. It was his home, his teacher, and his greatest source of peace. With quiet gratitude, he picked up his hat, smiled toward the open fields, and continued his day, knowing that every sunrise brought another chance to care for the land that had cared for him for so many years.